This week, Jeff Shiner from 1Password is with us to discuss the future of access management. Then we discuss the newly released Verizon DBIR report. Finally, in the enterprise security news, lots of funding announcements as we approach RSA, new products. The M-Trends report also rudely dropped on the same day as the Verizon DBIR. Supply chain threats. Windows Recall is making another attempt at maybe coming out. We'll see. MCP server challenges, non-human identities, a startup post-mortem, and remember that Zoom outage a week or two ago? The cause is very interesting, so you have to stick around to the end of the news segment to find out what that was, or you could just Google it and skip the show, but I would recommend sticking around. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1password. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Bucket List Day. This is episode 404, Podcast Not Found, recorded on Thursday, April 24th, 2025. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of ASPM, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How you doing, Katie?
I am well. What is on your bucket list? I know you're pretty good at checking things off, but what's good on you? What's up next?
As you can tell, maybe from my background here, I'm a big fan of whales, cetacea in general, and I've never seen whales in real life, so I would love to go on one of those whale watching tours. Whether up there in Boston, I know they've got a bunch of those, and San Diego, I hear is a great place in the summer months to see blue whales. So I think that would be pretty cool. That is definitely something on my bucket list. How about you?
Come on up. We've got lots of whale watching tours here, and I go up to Maine a couple of times a summer. Good time to get out on a boat then. Take your motion sickness stuff if you need it. But yeah, lots of whales here. So come on down. Bucket list. What's
your bucket list. Your turn.
Oh my goodness. It's usually travel related for me as well. It's hard to name just one.
We can come back to you. I can introduce Jackie and we can come back.
It's just I don't like being part of clubs. Like, that's my thing. I don't like clubs, but there is one club that I strive to be a member of, and that's the 100 Country Club. So my bucket list as far as travel is pretty wide open. Pardon me. The only places I don't want to go are war-torn places. So,
yeah. Well, that's great. That's like a meta bucket on your bucket list. So you've got all these sub buckets if you're going for 100 countries. I like that.
Yeah, my bucket list, my really short-term bucket list is to get rid of this cough so I don't have to turn myself on and off throughout this podcast every Thursday.
Also joining us, the Dean of Data Science, the Knight of Neurodiversity, the Watcher of Data Center Waste, Jackie McGuire. How are you doing, Jackie?
I am tired but caffeinated, so a little bit loopy. Kind of feel like I'm vibrating.
Yeah, great combination. Yeah. Excellent for a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna be wired. So PSA, but yeah, no, I've had a great week. I've been all over the place. I feel very productive, if exhausted.
Bucket list?
So travel destinations. Currently, I've actually never been to Hawaii, which makes me feel really lame, given that we live pretty close to the West Coast.
I haven't either.
And I would like to go back to Iceland. I was actually born in Iceland, but my family left before I was a year old. So I'd love to go back there. And then I don't even know how to say this without sounding absolutely insane, which I guess is kind of on brand for me, but I would really like to run for office at some point. Like, you feel
cool.
like not enough good people run for office, and
That
not
is
enough
not insane at
people.
all.
Yeah, like I given the current given our current climate, it seems insane, or at the least masochistic. But
Yeah.
longer term, yeah, I mean, I think if more good people ran for office for good reason, the world
I
would be
think
a much better place. So.
there's few better things you can do if you want to have a direct impact, if you're just tired of just like shouting at the news. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And I
agree.
feel like since I've lived 100 different lives, I can empathize with many different people. So
Yeah.
so that's long term.
What's another career switch? Why not?
It's kind of my hobby.
All right. So this interview is sponsored by 1Password, and today we're talking about the future of access management. We're excited to have Jeff Shiner, co-CEO of 1Password, with us today. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you. I feel like I need to earn a few more of those accolades that everybody else gets. Those were awesome.
Yeah. If you're a co-host on the show and you're here on the first segment, we've got a few folks that only come in for news, so I haven't made up anything from them. But if you're here more than 3 or 4 times, you'll get them.
Sounds like that should be my bucket list.
Be careful what you wish for.
If you want to contribute to the bucket list conversation, love to hear it.
Yeah. So my bucket list would be very different, I think, than most people. So I have a farm, and my hobby is taking apart tractors and putting them back together. But I've never actually grown a crop. We've got a real farmer who tills the land. It's all row crops. So at some point, I would like to actually take at least a part of that farm and truly grow and harvest my own crop.
So we just put together a planter, and I've done gardens before, and I cannot tell you how thrilled we are that this, 6 foot by 2 foot planter already has, lettuce and tomatoes and stuff like that coming out of it. So I can't imagine how rewarding it would be to have a whole field full of stuff that you could grow. And I totally on board with that. I totally get that.
I just planted my first plants too, and I thought I was just having my first midlife crisis because I bought a bunch of like plants, and and same thing. I have these little green tomatoes sprouting on my tomato plant, and every morning, I became a crazy plant person in literally like 3 days. It was, I just figured I was hitting middle age.
I think I'm past hitting middle age, but to me, it's that combination of big trucks, which I love, and just seeing the nature bloom is it's beautiful to watch throughout the seasons and see that change. So it's someday I will achieve that.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of satisfaction we don't necessarily get in our work, and we need some of that balance, right? It's extreme touching grass, right? Like touching grass taken to the extreme, growing grass.
And getting your hands like physically dirty, like that. That's just different from the sitting on the couch typing that I do all day long, even though that's productive in a different way.
It's very cathartic to get out there, and even with your fixing of trucks, very cathartic to be able to see something come together that, is a little more tangible. Sometimes the results of our work take months, years, decades to come to fruition, but actually putting something together, even if it's a tiny little bit at a time, you can see it. And same with plants and fruits and vegetables.
We have a 40-acre ranch, and we have goats. We still have it. I just moved closer to town for my kids. And for us, like every time my husband and I accomplish something out there, we high five and we say, "We won't die first." So that's what it is for me. It's like, okay, if like a massive EMP goes off and we have no electronics and no internet, we will not die first because we have the most basic survival skills that most people don't have anymore.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah, big right to repair fanatic. So I understand the taking things apart, fixing them up. Very satisfying videos too. That's my partner. One of her favorite genres of videos is people taking something old and rusty and making it new again.
Yeah, those are very fun to watch.
All right, so jumping into the conversation here, 1Password is a super interesting company. So I want to get a little context there before we go too deep on authentication. and access management. But so I've been a 1Password customer for a long time, but I noticed that it seemed like there was this point where all of a sudden there's a bunch of funding and kind of growing the company, growing into new product spaces more than just a consumer password manager. Which I think the password manager piece, I remember seeing that grow from consumer to enterprise. And at some point there's like a secrets manager as well. So maybe talk us a little bit about this transformation of the company that we've seen over, what's it been, like the last 5 years or so?
More than that, to be honest. So, it was founded by the two families, Dave Sarabistum and Natalia, but they brought me on 14 years ago now. Somehow it seems like a lifetime, sometimes like a day, but 14 years ago. And as you said, we were a consumer password manager. And then I started to see a trend where, back then there was a small number of businesses, they would actually buy copies of 1Password for all their employees as Christmas gifts to keep their employees safe. And then it started to change where, the company started to buy copies of all for all their employees to keep their business safe, even though we were still a consumer password manager. And so that was about 2013, 2014. And I said, okay, we got to protect people at work as well as at home. Right. And
that line isn't there anymore.
That line it doesn't exist anymore. Exactly. And so that first launched in 2016. Back then it was really kind of like 1Password for bowling leagues. It wasn't super sophisticated back then, but it grew every year, obviously, in sophistication. And now, we've got well over 150,000 businesses using us. And so what started to happen along the way is we had always been bootstrapped. It always build a good product, support the heck out of your customers. That's how I want to run my company. That's how I want to grow. That's how, I'm a product person. I'm an engineer by background. But come 2019, we're starting to have bigger and bigger companies, far more companies, but also larger enterprises start to be interested in us as we had, grown those capabilities. But we didn't have a go-to-market or a sales team. We didn't have a legal team for MSAs and all of that sort of stuff. We were just, 50% of us engineers, 50% of us customer support. So I went and I said, hey, I got build relationships with a bunch of VCs, as you can imagine, but it's like, hey, we didn't need their money. And so I went to Arun at Excel and I said, okay, we need to what I called grow and grow up. And in particular, I wanted to say, how do we add world-class go-to-marketing? How do we add world-class sales, world-class finance? How do we start to give benefits to our folks and stuff like that? Well, you do that by hiring leaders, super smart people. I didn't know how to find them. And I didn't know how to attract them because we're such a private company. Nobody knew if we were making money, not making money, any of that. And so that was the genesis of the first round. And, it was a 200 million first round, and it opened eyes up to our company and to our people. We started to share a little bit of the, hey, we're a real company numbers in it, and, a month later, Jeannie was our first C-level hire as our CFO, and she's now our COO, but, and it just moved on from there. And it was really that growing and growing up. And so that was the start of it. And then you talk about, moving on from a product point of view. There's sort of two things I always say, and quotes by, everybody calls me Shiner at work. Quotes by Shiner, they're a thing. They're not always smart quotes, but there's quotes. And the one thing I say is, how do you grow at scale? New markets and new products. And so that's how we grow at scale. But also, I don't want, my other quote, which is maybe a little sillier, is we're not here to make a game, right? Like, what do? We have the combination of productivity and security. How do we allow people to be productive while staying secure, make it easy to be secure? That's what we do. That's the area we want to stay in because we think we can, have an edge there and make an impact there. And so when we started to look at where we can help there, as you said, that whole home life, work life thing is all blurred. Along with that, everybody uses any device that they can to be productive, whether it's, I'm on my company issued Mac, but, it may be my personal phone in an hour. And then SaaS is probably the biggest change. If you think of it, like it used to be, so back in the day when I worked for IBM many years ago, it was not only like the computer they put on my desk, and it was a physical desk at the IBM building, but it was also the software that was on that computer that was on that desk in that building was the only software that existed from my perspective. Well, now you go to a conference, we'll be at RSA, and it'll be like somebody will say, hey, you should try this out. And we'll try that out. And and because of that, there's this sort of big gap in sort of the traditional access management of like the known and managed, where there's known and managed devices, the known and managed apps, even the known and managed locations to work. And now it's just like, hey, as human beings, how do we be productive? How do we do our work the best and most effective way we can? But then, the poor business is saying, hey, well, I love that, but like we got to stay secure while doing so. And so that's really where we've moved into with the extended access management.
Yeah, and that enterprise consumer trend is interesting. When we have identity verification folks come on and we ask about, what's the bleeding edge in identity verification for employee onboarding and things like that, and they say it's a smartphone in these people's pockets. We're completely dependent on the ability to tell the difference between a 2D image of someone's face and the physical face being there, the depth perception and stuff like that. So I find it fascinating that industry is almost entirely dependent right now on a consumer device that they hope is in somebody's pockets. You're still going to have a plan for, if somebody's flip phone only to do that identity verification piece. But most of the software out there really depends on a modern smartphone being in someone's pocket with a good front camera and some kind of LiDAR, infrared, some way of doing depth sensing.
Yeah, I think that, and you're right. Like that is certainly what we are relying on more and more. And there's certain benefits to that. It's certainly a lot, I'll say, more complete than a number of years ago, where it was, say, email address only, right, or something like that. But there's certainly challenges, especially when you look at it from a business perspective, where a lot of the times you're using different devices, like you're using the Windows machine or the Mac or the Linux or the stuff that the company gave you, and that's disassociated from that mobile device. And so there's challenges there from, as you say, an identification point of view, both from a productivity point of view of, do I have to go and find that thing? But I'd say even more so from a disassociation point of view. And if you're going from device to device, then there's a lot of opportunity for, fraud or just people that aren't who they say they are. And so I think more and more you have to rely on something that you can trust, but that's going to be across all of your devices equally. And I think that's going to be, there's two sides of identification there that I look at. One, I say, like, am I talking to the person I think I'm talking to, right? And that in a work context, it's like, if I, again, use Jeannie, am I talking to Jeannie? And then the second side of it is Jeannie actually who Jeannie says she is from a legal point of view, or did we hire somebody who's not actually Jeannie from the outset? And even though I'm talking to that person, that's not the real person. And you see some of the, articles about the deep fakes in hiring now that some of the, I think it was, North Korea was doing and stuff like that are just start from day one of pretending you're somebody else.
So that brings us to the conversation about extended access management. And I think this is the first time I'm hearing this term. So help me out, help me understand what you mean, or what it means to you and 1Password when you say extended access management.
Yeah, so we use a term called the access trust gap. And again, terms are fancy, but what is the access trust gap? And to me, the access trust gap is, especially from a business concept, it's the difference between the identities, apps, and devices that you manage as a business, and the identities, apps, and devices that are actually being used to get work done at your business. Mm-hmm. So that may be things like, hey,
shadow IT, right?
Shadow IT, shadow AI, BYOD, right? All of these sorts of things that are unknown or unmanaged to the company, that is where work is actually being done. And it doesn't always mean that the company is against that. In fact, more and more the companies have, I would say, no fundamental problem with you using it. They may have specific problems with specific apps or specific devices, but they want to know that they have control, and they want to know that it's being done, I'll say, securely or safely. So The access trust gap is that difference, between the known and the managed and where work's actually being done. So when we look at it in the simplest terms, extended access management is how do we manage all of what's being used to get work done, not just the known and managed. And so that extends into, the what would traditionally be shadow IT, what apps are being used, what websites are being used. That extends into personal devices and things like that. One of the interesting challenges with that, and I'll use, BYOD as a great example. I think of my phone. My phone is my phone. I'm not putting a device manager that controls everything and decides tomorrow that it's going to wipe my device. I don't even do anything interesting on my device. I'm still not allowing them to do that, right? And so when we build it, and so again, it's not just enough to have visibility as a business. You actually have to apply policies, right? Otherwise, you're just stressing somebody at the business out if you're just saying, here's 20 more problems. And so how does a policy work where you don't have control of the device and you can't force feed updates or force feed things like that? And so how it works instead is it gives you as an employee the option. You control that device, especially if it's a personal device. So it's my phone. I get to decide what I do on that phone, what I put on that phone, whether I'm going to keep it up to date intentionally or otherwise, or turn on disk encryption or whatever the policy says. And so if that device rather isn't healthy by the policy of the business, when you go to log into an app being used for business, that's when our device trust will block you and say you can't use this app. It's a business app on this device until you fix these things. And we'll lay out exactly what steps you have to take, but you still have to take them because it's still your device. And if you don't, and if you choose not to for whatever reason, you can't use work on that device, or based on your policy, whatever is blocked, you can still go play Angry Birds. You can still go check Facebook, whatever you need to do, but work won't be allowed on that device. We'll block the authentication to the apps and websites that are being used for work on that device until you make those changes. And so that I think is the important difference in some of those. But even in managed devices, we find it useful because like a device manager is there to put things on your device and control the state of your device, but it doesn't check for a bunch of things like, do you have secrets in the files that are on your managed devices? So if you have managed devices and things like that where you can see more, we can see, are you storing a private key publicly, or your SSH keys or things like that on your device? Are you storing documents that aren't allowed? Do you have something like, if you're using CrowdStrike or something like that, is it configured incorrectly? So even though the MDM put it on there, and it's surprising the number of those. So there's a lot we can do even on the managed devices, but that's the general essence of it.
So you would have to be somewhat in line to be able to, act out this enforcement, right? So what are you building that puts you in that authentication authorization workflow?
Yeah, so there's a number of things there. So again, where things like SSOs are used, say you use Okta, we can be in the flow of Okta, acts effectively as a secondary factor, like as an MFA. So we can block the authentication by saying the MFA failed if your device isn't healthy, for instance, for device trust. For websites and like the SaaS apps that go through there, it's the extension that will block the access by, again, seeing it's a work domain and you're signing on with work credentials, like with a work email or something like that. And then we can actually block we can run the health check as you do that on the device. And if the policy is not met, then we can actually prevent the login or the attempt to log in on those devices.
And I presume these are features that are either like modules, add-ons for the existing password manager tool. You mentioned the extension, so building onto that same code base, that same product.
So there's actually 5 different. So we look at extended access management as a platform, and it's got I'll try and hand wave myself through the architectural diagram, but if you think of it, it's got 3 pillars, right? It's got EPM, which is the password manager. It's got device trust for device and the policies there. And then it's got access governance, which is on the app side and granting access to devices or to apps and understanding shadow IT and even all the way down to like SaaS spend management, who's using what licenses. So those are the three pillars. And then on the top, there's the app launcher, which is really a way that employees can choose to launch any app regardless of how it authenticates. It's the productivity side. Not required, but again, it's a very useful launcher. And then on the bottom side, the admin console, which we call the XAM console, and that is, as you can imagine, more for the admins to use so that they can see for individuals what apps, devices are being used by this identity, what access do they have, what access are they requesting, and things like that. And then it will launch into the three tools. So those are the pillars are the three separate SKUs or the three separate products, but they work very much together. And a lot of the broader solutions like path to passwordless and things like that are actually enabled by that virtual 1 + 1 + 1 equals some number greater than 3.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that must give you that's a very useful asset database, I would imagine, too, for security operations, things like that. 0 day or something happens with a particular SaaS vendor. That's you want to have some idea of who's using that. Whether it's in a corporate sense, corporate paid and owned, or somewhat BY. Bring your own SaaS, but maybe still putting corporate data in there.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my question about where you see the future, because at some level, logins are the perfect SaaS asset management tool. I used to work in the space, and there was always a question of, is SaaS the same? Is it different than other assets? But password managers like yours are the perfect mechanism to understand what's going on in individuals' ecosystems. So how do you see that playing out a year, 3 years, 5 years from now? We've been moving towards passwordless for eons, and thank goodness we're on the precipice of it. And yay for passkeys. Thank you for storing them in my 1Password. But what do you see, in your little crystal ball that you probably keep right there on your desk?
I wish I had on my desk. This is my hotel room desk, so I'm missing my crystal ball. But if we look at it from the authentication perspective, I'm all there on passkeys. I've also been around long enough that I think the reality is all forms of authentication are going to be around for far too many years, whether we want them to or not. And so I look at that as very much of a journey. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of businesses face today is there's like the pressure to go passwordless because, if you look at the Verizon report or others, you'll see the same old thing. Humans are the source of a lot of troubles, right? There was actually another report that came out around BYO devices and unmanaged devices, and the something like 92% of all ransomware starts with them. And so I think the reality is, like, as a business, there's a lot of pressure to go into passwordless, and people talk about it as if it's this switch, right? Turn on the passwordless switch. And so,
same with MFA, right? They talked about it the same way. Yeah,
exactly. And so if I look at passwordless and if I look at the approach that I think makes the most sense, and we're, just selfishly trying to are enabling through XAM, is the first thing is, like, where are passwords being used within your organization? That's the first thing that businesses need to know, because we think of it in terms of what are the SaaS apps and things like that. But in a lot of cases, it's internal apps as well that are being, written, and, how many COBOL programs are still around, right? And things like that. So it's like identifying that. And then the second step is, how do we, in a broad sweep, try and improve the access for as many of those as we can? And so not only do you want to identify it, you then want to say, well, okay, which of those allow for MFA to be enabled, right? And maybe it's a quarter of them or whatever. Which of those apps that are you're using, passwords on enable passkeys? Because as you said, like, I think passkeys 100% are the future. And for the rest of them, which of those are using Fluffy Cat as their password and need to be strengthened, right? And so then you can relatively quickly, and everything is relatively quickly, then go from visibility into, okay, we're going to put some fundamental rules, like if MFA is enabled or a certain type of MFA is enabled, maybe, we're going to enforce it, or if passkeys are an option, we're going to, I'll say require their use. But, for the rest of them, then it's a case of, we know at least you're using strong, unique passwords. Now, the security teams can say, which are the 10 that I'm going to go and focus on, right? And we can even help them there and use a bit of AI to say, which are the ones that are most likely to have sensitive data, be it customer data or maybe these are the ones that are supposed to have, HIPAA compliance, depending on your company, or they have PII or whatever they are, so maybe I'm going to move those behind an SSO. Maybe that'll be the next step. Or maybe we're going to, whatever, do an access review on those. So I think it's steps. It's that path to passwordless. It's that journey that doesn't just say make it passwordless, that I think is really going to enable that true move to an eventual passwordless approach, but to one where you can understand that everything's been uplifted at least somewhat, and you understand where to pay attention.
No,
So
I have to say that BYOD just sketches me out so much. And I say this all the time, but just coming from finance where it was highly regulated and then taking my first data science job, and they're like, oh yeah, just sign into our Google Workspace on your own phone. Like, wait, what? And I bought a second phone because I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. I was like, one, I don't want anything on my phone infecting whatever is happening in Google Workspace, and vice versa. I don't want being targeted through Google Workspace to affect my phone. But yeah, it's interesting. That was only like not quite 10 years ago, and how far we've come in terms of that's just the norm now. And it's everybody, you've got everybody's using their own devices. And it's the one part that I still can't quite wrap my brain around in security, that seems like it's a glaring hole, that is just the convenience factor and the asset management factor of it is just something that we've accepted. So
yeah.
I also look at it like my son just turned 25 yesterday, and like him and his phone, they're effectively
Inseparable.
the same identity. Yeah. They're inseparable. And so I think, as much as we might say, hey, here's another phone. It used to be the BlackBerry, right? Everybody got a BlackBerry. Mm-hmm. You might do that, and you might require them to use that phone for, hey, here's the, if you're going to log into HR or the finance system or Salesforce or whatnot, you're going to use this. But it's hard to do that for Slack or Teams or email or worse yet, like the water cooler cat picture sharing website that you use to try and grow culture at the company and stuff like that. And yet that's the way that you start to see cat picture sharing website. Katie's way ahead of us, and that's the sort of thing that I think is where people can get in the door, and then once they're in the door, then the damage can start to happen. So that's the tough part.
And what I want to wrap up with is, I know for me, 1Password is, I'm lost without it because I try everything all the time. I'm constantly, I even give a talk about this, about how I call them cyber scouts. It's important to have at least some people in the industry who are always trying out new stuff so that they can warn others, when they find the pitfalls, the issues, the edges that we need to be aware of. And what that leads to is I've got over 1,400 items in my 1Password database. I don't know what any of the passwords are because they're all generated. How sticky is this product? Is this, because it seems to me like, I'm sure I'm not the only one who enjoys using the product, right? We don't always enjoy using security products, but is the barrier of getting people used to the workflow of using password managers, because it seems like just 5 years ago there were still a lot of places where I still talk to a lot of people who had never used one before. Are we kind of over that hump where getting this on the device is no longer an argument. It's no longer a push. Like people are kind of welcome the use of these tools, which makes the other stuff you're trying to do easier. I would imagine.
I would say it's constantly going in that direction. Are we all the way there? No. Okay. And so, whereas like you say 5 years ago, maybe 2 in 10 people, like I don't think anybody even 5 years ago or 10 years ago was proud of the passwords they chose. Right. But 10 years ago, people didn't know there was an option, and they certainly didn't know that option was easy. And now I think people do know there's an option, and it's a, password manager, whether it's on your browser, whether it's 1Password or whatnot. But I still think there's that general, I say people come for the security and stay for the convenience. So to your point about sticky, tremendously sticky, because people, again, it's how do I be good by being lazy, right? How do I not have to remember stuff and not have to fill it in and just tap and do stuff, whether it's a passkey, whether it's a password, doesn't matter. Like I can just use it. But there's still that initial burden of like, taking that first step that is just in a lot of people's mind, one of like, yeah, I know I should, but will
but
I?
I like my 1Password, right? The 1Password they use for everything that's not a master password.
I still
it's just
find
a bad password.
More people than I would like, people in businesses more than I would like, they will start using it when they or somebody near them had been breached, and that's just unfortunate, because it is, to your point, it is so easy to use once you start. But I'm gonna get on my healthy food diet tomorrow.
Yeah.
my husband was forced to a total non-techie Luddite to the core, and was forced into 1Password when we got engaged and merged finance accounts. I said, that's it. You don't have a choice. So now he knows his 1Password and nothing else, and I'm so proud.
And that's honestly how 90% of this works. There's an advocate within the family, and they share it, whether it's with parents.
I wasn't
siblings,
an advocate. I was a
family.
bully. I just said, this is happening.
Yeah. Well, okay, it's a strong advocate, but no, it's exactly right. And then others use it. In my case, it's my wife and son, and now they're big advocates of it. But it does take at times that one person to say, "Hey, let's get started."
But you know what? I mean, to end on a happy note, it really, for him and other people that I've bullied into it, at first it's like, oh my God, but it does become a convenience factor. So they do end up more secure. They love being able to, look at it or use their fingerprint or whatever form of authentication they have. And now there's never that, oh, expletive, I don't remember my password. It just doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. And it's so much easier. And in the meantime, you get to protect your retirement accounts, and you get to protect your health data, and you get to protect all the things you need to protect. And it's like an aha moment, I think, for a lot of people once they realize it's, like you said, it's the, hey, I know passwords. I've known passwords. Once you get over that hump, it's like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, very much so.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thanks for making the time.
Oh, more than happy to do so. This was a ton of fun.
All right, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/1Password to learn more, and stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Verizon 2025 Data Breach Investigations Report.